So I just got back from Chicago. I was fortunate to be able to attend the NCTE-NCTM joint conference, and I loved it. I was telling you, John, yesterday, I really enjoyed the conference.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the format. I liked the location. There was really nothing that I would change about it. I thought it was really well done. One of the things that I loved about this particular conference was that the sessions were all different lengths. So it's like you had a 30-minute session, a 60-minute session, a 75-minute session. And I loved it, because it allowed me to curate a learning experience throughout the day that was different. Like I need that breakup in my day. So it's like knowing I was going into a 75, but then there was going to be a 30 after. I thought it was great. And I also liked the venue because sometimes we go to these conferences and I feel like I'm trying to run across a massive conference center because the session I want to see in the next time slot is on the absolute other side of the venue, where this was all up and down the elevator. There wasn't a single session that I missed because of the actual layout of the conference. So in this episode, with all that being said about my positive experience with that conference, I wanted to just share with you my favorite session and what I learned. Okay.
Let's do it.
So I went to a session with Annie Forrest, who is a consultant from the Illinois area. And I can't remember the exact title, but it was well attended because it had an interesting title, which you always say is so key to getting people to your session, right? You need a title that's going to pique their interest. Mm-hmm. It was something about when math instructional routines go wrong or when they don't work. And so although in the session we unpacked some of the ways that we don't set ourselves up for success when we're implementing instructional routines, what I loved about the session is that we actually did them.
Nice.
Like I had such a positive experience because we always talk about ourselves about the importance of getting to the math, which is something that in my own session at the conference, I got to the math. But what I didn't do is build in instructional routines into the room. Like how, in hindsight, I thought, why didn't I build in these types of routines?
Like you were saying you didn't model the lesson as if you were using routines that you would want them to use if they were giving the lesson.
Well, and not even the lesson necessarily, because oftentimes we go to sessions and we model, let's say, a 3-part math lesson.
Sure.
And we put them in the experience of the student. But these were more routines where it's like, okay, in my session, I had people doing the work, right? They were at their table. It was very much, I was facilitating. I wasn't monologuing. It was a very interactive session. But then I could have said, okay, now we're going to get into an instructional routine where we're going to, and I'll share one that's a perfect example of this. We're going to move around the room. This is what it's going to look like. This is how you're going to interact during this routine to try to build structure into the room to support cooperation and collaboration. So with all that said, I had a lot to say there. I'm going to give you a concrete example to unpack. So Annie mentioned that a lot of the routines that she was highlighting were from Spencer Kagan's cooperative learning structures. So if anybody wants to reference, the original research around these cooperative learning structures. So picture me, I'm in a session and we go to do this protocol that's called quiz trade. Okay. So we all have cue cards and our cue card has some type of prompt on the front. Okay, the ones that we were doing were algebraic. So essentially I had one that mine was 4 plus an unknown quantity equals -8. That was my card. On the back of my card, I had the solution and a bit of an explanation for the solution.
To your own card.
To my own card. But before we started that experience, she gave us an instructional routine called stand up, hand up, partner up. Okay, so picture this. I stand up. If I put my hand up, that means I don't have a partner and I'm looking for somebody. Once I make eye contact with another person with their hand up, we become pairs.
Sure.
Okay. That person and I engage in our quiz trade situation. So basically my partner held up his card and I talked him through my solution and we agreed on my solution.
Got it.
He then looked at my equation.
Yep.
He gave me his explanation for his solution. And what was fascinating is that his initial response was incorrect, which was awesome. Like it was like almost more interesting because then we got to talk through. I was like, I'm not convinced, and I was being careful with my language because, of course, that's intimidating. I've just met this person for the very first time.
Sure.
So we talked through, okay, we think it's this. Well, how can we prove that it's not? We modeled together.
Right.
But what was really cool is that once he and I were done, we traded cards.
Yep.
But we probably took twice as long as everybody else.
Okay.
But then you look around the room for who else has a hand up. So it's not like we had to wait for every partnership in the room to finish their quiz trade. Because as soon as you and your partner were done, your hand goes up.
And then it's just like fluid.
I like to
see.
Because it
was awesome.
What reminded, because the really original, the original premise of the structure reminded me a routine I regularly use, which was the appointment clock structure. Like where originally, like when you were explaining this, my mind immediately went to like the appointment clock structure where kids were, had this clock and they had to like go around the room and make appointments for each other and say, hey, are you open at 12 o'clock? Are you open at 12 o'clock? And they would fill their appointments up, which was basically them creating partner scenarios, and they had their question and they had to do their solution. And then we would then call.
So where my mind goes, and, we've all done some of these types of partnering activities, but the part I'm really liking, and, I know John used to be a big fan of the appointment clock. Kids are going around and finding different times on their clock to partner up. But as you can imagine, you do run into some roadblocks with some of those structures where you're looking around and you can't find someone who has 3 o'clock open on their clock. And now you're running around, and that can be fun. But here, I like that it's fluid. Like, so you may, and I'm extrapolating a little bit here, but with this particular routine, it sounds to me like, knowing you and knowing how you would want to go down the rabbit hole with like, convincing you or your partner on the solution, you might make it to less partners than say someone else in the room who's like done double the partnerships. However, that sounds like pretty awesome. Like, it sounds very differentiated in the sense that you aren't feeling rushed. You're not feeling like, this is the other part too, when we use things like timers and we say, hey, everyone, for 2 minutes, you have 2 minutes to share. And some people are getting cut off. Some people are done early and they're just kind of waiting and lingering. And in this particular scenario, it sounds like, you go until the conversation's maybe no longer fruitful, productive, useful, helpful, whatever it might be. And then you're right back at it. And in my mind, there should always be 2 more hands up, correct? Assuming you're not going back to the same person. So I love it.
Yeah, it was such a cool structure. And in the session, Annie talked about when we're looking at different structures to implement, we need to look at the ratio of doing and not doing. Like, how many kids are not doing anything in the structure that I've implemented?
This is like sports. I always say, like at a sports practice where it's like, this is a drill that only 2 kids are doing something at a time and everybody else is standing waiting, and that happens a whole lot in our classrooms. And I would also say there's probably this other element there too of like, sometimes there's like flare and flash factor. So for example, if we have the appointment clock, we might have to print out these appointment clocks, or the kids have to draw out the appointment clock. Or when you think of just how fast or how quickly or efficiently we can get the actual routine going, I think that's a really important aspect as well. Like, it's got to be quick enough to understand and do, but it also has to be quick enough to start and finish so that we're not like losing additional time in our classroom to unnecessary parts of the routine that we could clean up.
It was great. So then my reflection on my own session was, what could I have done as far as implementing an instructional routine that would have strengthened our internalization of because I was focused on content, right? I was actually explicitly teaching a mathematical concept and my focus was division. But how could I have embedded routines so that they could not only continue to internalize the learning from the day, but then even if they walked away and they weren't confident about partitive and quotative division, they would have that routine to take with them.
Right. So there is a win and there is something there that they can walk away with. I love that. And I know so well how when you are presenting an idea, especially as you continue to learn and you're learning new ideas. And of course, as presenters, we want to present those newer ideas because they're top of mind. We're excited about them. We're eager to share. Sometimes we end up glossing over some of the things that aren't maybe as interesting or are quote unquote old. And sometimes we sort of like fast forward through some of those things, assuming everyone's been on the same learning journey as you, the presenter. And I think that's a really, really important aspect. And I think this also bridges something we've been talking a lot about, where oftentimes we highlight that a lot of professional development is like solely focused on pedagogical moves. And we've been talking a lot about the content piece. And really, this is a great example of trying to bridge those two together, because again, we don't want it to just be content or just be pedagogy. How can we kind of bring those two things together? And I think, this session is something that sort of has you thinking differently, but then also has us thinking differently as we prepare for some of our summer workshops that we'll be doing with educators in different parts of North America.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely was a great opportunity for me because, like you said, although the session was on instructional routines and how we can implement them in our classroom to ensure more engagement and cooperative learning, we did the math. And we always say, math PD should have math
100%.
as a key component of the experience. So this was a perfect blending of the two, I thought. So shout out to Annie for running such a awesome session. It was my favorite of the, many, many awesome sessions. That was the one that I think left me feeling the most inspired for change.
Love it. Love it. Well, that is fantastic. Thanks for giving us that rundown. And Annie, keep on rocking. Friends, on this note, we are actually actively in the planning process for the virtual summit coming up this fall. So if you've never been a part of the virtual summit, you should head over to makemathmoments.com/summit and get your name there for this free event. We are super geeked and jazzed. If you have something that you think is worth sharing with the math world, then you should be heading over to that summit page as well and submitting a proposal. We are always looking to amplify the voices of other math educators and leaders from around North America and around the world. So hopefully we will see you at the virtual summit this November 2025.